Elena Alvarez sat across from him, her fingers trembling as they clutched the thin handle of her worn-out purse. The sharp scent of leather and whiskey filled the air of his office, so different from the faint perfume clinging to her second-hand dress. Every inch of this place screamed of wealth: polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering skyline, and a man in a black suit who looked like he belonged to a world carved from steel and ice. Alexander King, the billionaire every newspaper called ruthless, the tycoon who built empires and destroyed rivals with a single word, and now, the man who claimed he had a solution to her problems. "You want me to marry you?" Elena whispered, disbelief shaking her voice. His cold, unreadable gaze didn't waver. "For 1 year. In exchange, I'll wire $2 million into your account, enough to pay your father's medical bills, your brother's tuition, and more. You'll want for nothing." Her heart slammed against her ribs. $2 million. It was more than she could ever dream of. But the way he said it, like buying her was no different than purchasing another skyscraper, made her skin prickle. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Alexander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his expression carved from stone. "Because I don't have time for love. I need a wife on paper, someone who understands boundaries, someone who won't expect anything more." His eyes narrowed, cold and sharp. "And you are desperate enough to accept." Shame burned Elena's cheeks. He was right. Her father's health was failing. Debt collectors were circling. Every job she applied for had slammed doors in her face. She had run out of choices. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "And if I say no?" Alexander's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then your father's treatment ends in 2 weeks. Her breath caught. It wasn't just an offer. It was blackmail, wrapped in silk. The silence stretched. Outside, the city lights blinked like distant stars, mocking her. Inside, Elena's world tilted. She had dreamed of marriage once. White dress, vows whispered under soft light, a kiss that meant forever. But this was a transaction, a contract, not a union, a cage dressed in diamonds. Still, she thought of her father's pale face, of her brother's pleading eyes when the tuition notice arrived. Could she live with herself if she walked away? Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "What are the rules?" Alexander's eyes glittered with victory, though his face remained calm. He opened a sleek folder on his desk and slid it toward her. "No love, no expectations, no questions about my past. In public, you will be my perfect wife. Behind closed doors, we are strangers." Her gaze skimmed the papers, the neat black ink spelling out her fate. At the bottom was a blank line waiting for her signature. Elena's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She could almost hear her mother's voice in her head, warning her, begging her not to do this. But then she thought of her father, of losing him, of watching her family crumble because she didn't take this chance. The pen touched the paper. With each stroke of her name, a piece of her heart broke. When she finally set the pen down, Alexander stood. He was taller than she imagined, his shadow stretching long across her. He extended his hand, cold, firm, unyielding. "Congratulations, Mrs. King," he said, his voice low and final. "Our marriage begins tomorrow." And just like that, Elena's world changed forever.
Welcome to another episode of Ever After. Kindly comment where you are listening from and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next episode.
Chapter 1. The Contract Signed in Blood. The marriage certificate lay on the glossy mahogany desk, its neat black ink stark against the cream paper. Elena stared at it, her pulse racing in her ears like a drumbeat. Mrs. Elena King. The words looked foreign, almost cruel, like a name stolen from someone else's life. "Smile," Alexander's deep voice commanded, cool as glass. He didn't look at her, didn't soften the command with warmth. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, the silver gleaming against his dark tailored suit. The photographer hovered nearby, snapping pictures for the press release Alexander had orchestrated. The billionaire weds in a private ceremony. It was all theater, every detail choreographed to perfection. Elena's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The weight of the ring on her finger felt like a shackle, heavy and unyielding. Alexander slid his hand to the small of her back, not tenderly but possessively as though staking a claim. "You're mine now," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm but his tone edged with steel. The cameras clicked. Inside, Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to pull away, to scream that this wasn't real, that she was nothing but a woman who'd sold her soul for her father's life. But outside, her body played the role perfectly, his perfect bride. When the ceremony ended, they walked through a corridor lined with reporters. Flashbulbs exploded, questions flew like arrows. "Mr. King, why the sudden marriage? Is it true you fell in love at first sight? Elena, what drew you to the billionaire bachelor?" Alexander didn't falter. His mask of calm dominance was flawless. He leaned closer to the microphones, his arm tightening around Elena's waist. "Sometimes life surprises you," he said smoothly, a practiced lie sliding off his tongue. "I met Elena, and I knew she was the one." Gasps and sighs followed, the crowd enamored by his performance. Elena kept her smile plastered on, but her stomach twisted. Every word was a dagger, so close to truth in their sound, yet so empty in their meaning. The limo ride to his penthouse was silent, the city lights streaking past like blurred stars. Elena sat rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. "You did well," Alexander said finally, his eyes fixed on the darkened skyline outside. "The press will eat it up. You'll keep smiling like that in public, no matter what." Her jaw tightened. "And in private?" His gaze flicked to her then, sharp and unreadable. "In private, you're free to be as miserable as you like. But don't confuse this with freedom." The words landed like ice water on her skin. She turned her face away, blinking hard against the sting of tears. When the limo finally stopped, the driver opened the door to reveal Alexander's world. A skyscraper that towered into the clouds, its glass walls glittering like diamonds. Inside, the penthouse stretched across the top floor, a palace in the sky. Elena stepped in and gasped softly. White marble floors stretched beneath her heels, chandeliers glittered like captured constellations, and walls of glass opened to a breathtaking view of the city below. Luxury radiated from every corner, but it only made her feel smaller, more out of place. "This is your home now," Alexander said, his tone detached, almost clinical. "You'll have access to anything you want, clothes, staff, accounts. But don't mistake this for a partnership. This is an arrangement." Elena's heart sank deeper. The word arrangement was a reminder of everything she'd signed away. "And if I break a rule?" she whispered. Alexander's eyes darkened, his voice dropping low. "Then you'll regret it." Silence pressed heavy between them. Later that night, Elena wandered into the guest wing she'd been given. Her room was enormous, king-sized bed, silk sheets, closets filled with clothes she hadn't bought. It was everything a girl might dream of, except it felt like a cage lined with gold. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, weak but full of gratitude when she'd told him the bills were paid. "You're my angel, Elena." Tears burned her eyes. "If only you knew what I had to give up to save you." From across the penthouse, faint footsteps echoed. Alexander's, no doubt, measured, steady, commanding even in silence. She wondered if he ever let himself feel, if beneath that armor of control there was a man who had once wanted more than money and power. She lay back on the cold sheets, staring at the ceiling. The contract's words repeated in her mind. No love, no expectations, no questions. But her heart whispered a dangerous thought she couldn't silence. What if, One day, she broke every rule. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Mask. Elena woke to the faint hum of the city, the skyscrapers glowing like embers beyond the glass walls of her room. Sleep had been restless, haunted by the weight of vows spoken in lies. She sat up, the silk sheets pooling around her, and realized the penthouse was too silent, too perfect. Her throat tightened. He's probably already gone. Men like Alexander King don't linger. They conquer, then move on. She slipped into a robe, padding barefoot across the marble hall. Curiosity tugged her down the corridor, toward the sound of faint, rhythmic clashing. It wasn't until she reached the far end of the penthouse that she found him. The doors to a private gym were half open, and there he was. Alexander, stripped of his suit, dressed only in black workout pants and a sheen of sweat. He moved with sharp precision, striking against a heavy punching bag. Each blow landed with the weight of unspoken rage. Elena froze in the doorway. This wasn't the polished billionaire from the tabloids. This was a man fighting something invisible, every punch carrying pain he never allowed the world to see. He stopped suddenly, his broad chest heaving, his knuckles raw despite the wraps. His head tilted, sensing her. Enjoying the view? Heat rushed to Elena's cheeks. She tried to retreat, but his voice pinned her in place. "I didn't mean to intrude," she murmured. Alexander wiped his brow with a towel, his gaze lingering on her. There was something different in his eyes now. Tired, haunted. Not the arrogant dominance of yesterday, but a flicker of something more human. "You should learn not to wander," he said finally, though his tone lacked the sharpness she'd grown used to. "This house has corners you're not ready to see." Elena crossed her arms, summoning courage. "Maybe I'm tired of only seeing what you want me to." His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, she thought he would snap back. But instead, he turned away, pacing toward the window that overlooked the sprawling city below. "I built this empire," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Brick by brick. Every man who doubted me is in the dirt now. And yet," his words faltered, cut off like a secret almost exposed. "And yet what?" she pressed, her voice gentle. He shot her a look, the mask sliding back into place. "And yet, it's none of your business." Her heart stuttered. He was shutting her out just as she expected, but the crack she'd glimpsed stayed with her. For a brief moment, she had seen more than the ruthless billionaire. She had seen the man who bled behind closed doors. That evening, the staff prepared a dinner so exquisite it could have graced a palace. Elena sat across from Alexander at a table that could seat 20, the distance between them sharp as a blade. She toyed with her fork, appetite absent. "Do you ever get lonely up here?" she asked suddenly. His eyes lifted, cool and assessing. "Lonely?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "You have everything. Wealth, power, a city at your feet. But this place feels empty." Silence stretched. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the crystal glass. "I don't have time for loneliness," he said flatly. "Or you don't allow yourself to feel it," she countered. His gaze darkened, dangerous now. But instead of anger, there was something else flickering there. Recognition. "You're too curious for your own good, Elena." His voice lowered, velvety and sharp. "That curiosity will destroy you." Her chest tightened, but she held his stare. "Maybe. Or maybe it will save me." Later, when the city lights dimmed and the penthouse fell into silence, Elena stood by her window, replaying the evening in her mind. Alexander's words, his fleeting vulnerability, the storm in his eyes. All of it churned inside her. This wasn't just a contract marriage. It was a collision course, because she had seen the man behind the mask. And now, she couldn't unsee him. Chapter 3. The First Public Test. The invitation arrived the next morning in a cream envelope sealed with Alexander's insignia, a silver crown above 2 crossed swords. Elena frowned at the embossed letters. "The King Foundation Annual Gala," she read aloud, her voice uncertain. "That's tonight?" Alexander didn't look up from his laptop, lounging casually on the leather sofa. "You're my wife now. The public expects us to appear together." Her chest tightened. She had survived their wedding by retreating behind a polite smile. But a gala was different. The media would be there. His world, polished, merciless, would be watching her. "You could have warned me," she muttered. He smirked. "Consider this your warning." By the time evening fell, Elena stood before a gilded mirror, nerves twisting like vines in her stomach. The stylist Alexander's staff had summoned had transformed her into someone unrecognizable. The gown was midnight blue, clinging delicately to her frame and spilling into a sea of silk at her feet. Diamonds glittered at her throat, her hair swept into an elegant chignon. She barely recognized the woman staring back. "You clean up well," Alexander's voice drawled from the doorway. Elena turned, and her breath caught. He was devastating in a tailored black tuxedo, sharp lines sculpting his frame, his tie perfectly knotted. But it wasn't just his appearance. It was the way he looked at her. For once, his gaze wasn't merely assessing. It lingered. "Let's get this over with," she said, trying to steady her pulse. The gala was held in a glittering ballroom dripping with chandeliers, every surface gleaming gold and glass. Photographers lined the entrance, flashes igniting as the sleek black car rolled to a stop. When Alexander stepped out, the crowd buzzed like a storm. He extended a hand to Elena, the gesture formal yet magnetic. Her fingers trembled as she placed hers in his, and together they walked into the blaze of cameras. "Elena King, ladies and gentlemen," Alexander announced to the press with a charm that seemed effortless. Elena plastered a smile, praying no one saw how it faltered. But as flashes blinded her, something strange happened. Instead of shrinking, she found her footing. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. King, what's it like being married to the most eligible bachelor in the country?" Elena's lips curved, her voice soft but steady. "Challenging. He leaves no room for mistakes." The crowd laughed, charmed by her candor. Even Alexander's jaw ticked, as though surprised she hadn't stumbled. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with opulence. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities mingled beneath the chandeliers, their jewels flashing like stars. Elena could feel eyes on her, weighing, judging, dissecting. But she held her chin high, remembering every time life had tried to break her before. Compared to those storms, this was only glitter and noise. "You're doing well," Alexander murmured beside her, his hand pressing lightly against the small of her back. The touch was meant to guide her, but it sent heat spiraling through her chest. "Surprised," she whispered back. His lips brushed dangerously close to her ear as he leaned in. A little. The night unfolded like a battlefield. Elena was introduced to billionaires, politicians, women in gowns worth more than her childhood home. She smiled, spoke, and listened, her nerves steadying with every passing moment. But it wasn't until Alexander stepped away to speak with a senator that she faced her first true test. "Mrs. King, isn't it?" A woman approached, tall and sleek, with eyes like daggers. "Camilla Hart. I used to work with your husband." There was a sharpness to her tone that made Elena wary. "Pleasure to meet you." Camilla's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I must say, you're braver than most. Alexander isn't an easy man to live with. His wives never last." The words sliced through Elena, but she refused to flinch. Instead, she tilted her head. Perhaps that's because they saw him only as Alexander King, the tycoon, not Alexander, the man. Camilla blinked, momentarily silenced. At that exact moment, Alexander returned, his presence eclipsing everything else. His gaze swept between the two women, sharp enough to cut glass. "Camilla," he said smoothly, though his tone carried steel, "I see you've met my wife." "Yes," Camilla replied, eyes glinting. Unexpected. Alexander's hand slipped into Elena's, his grip firm, possessive. She's exactly what I need. Hours later, when the gala wound down and the city glittered beneath their limousine windows, Elena finally exhaled. "I think I survived," she whispered. Alexander studied her, his face unreadable in the shadows. "You didn't just survive. You owned it." Warmth spread through her chest, unexpected and dangerous. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw pride in his eyes. Not the kind reserved for business victories, but something softer. Then he looked away, shutters slamming down once more. "Don't let it get to your head. Tonight was just the beginning." But Elena leaned back against the seat, a smile tugging at her lips. Because tonight, for the first time, she hadn't felt like a pawn in his game. She had felt like his equal. Chapter 4. The first crack in the contract. The limousine had barely pulled into the King Estate's driveway when Elena exhaled, relief pouring through her. But relief didn't last. Alexander was already out of the car, his long strides sharp against the gravel, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was clipped, commanding, each word laced with power. Elena followed, clutching her gown to keep from tripping. By the time she entered the mansion, he was gone, disappearing into his study, the heavy door slamming shut. She stood in the grand foyer, the diamonds at her throat suddenly feeling like chains. This was supposed to be her life now, dazzling nights, locked doors, and Alexander King's cold indifference. It was well past midnight when Elena padded into the kitchen, her gown traded for a soft robe. She needed water, something normal. The marble countertops gleamed under low golden light, and for once, the house was quiet. But when she opened the refrigerator, a voice cut through the silence. "You held your own tonight." She nearly jumped, spinning to find Alexander leaning against the doorway, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Without the tuxedo armor, he looked human. His hair was mussed, his tie undone, the hard edges softened by exhaustion. "I didn't realize I was being graded," she said, her pulse quickening. "You always are," he replied, though his tone lacked the usual bite. Elena poured herself a glass of water, pretending his presence didn't unsettle her. "And what's my score, Mr. King?" Alexander's lips curved into something dangerously close to a smile. "Higher than I expected." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't cold either. He crossed the kitchen, his steps unhurried, until he stood close enough for her to catch the faint scent of his cologne, woody, warm, intoxicating. "You surprised me, Elena," he admitted, his voice low. "Camilla has a reputation for shredding newcomers, but you didn't bend." "I've been bent before," Elena murmured, staring into her glass. "I don't break anymore." Something flickered in his eyes, a crack in his iron control. For a heartbeat, he wasn't the ruthless tycoon or the husband of convenience. He was a man staring at a woman who challenged him in ways he didn't expect. "Elena." His voice was rough, almost hesitant. Her breath caught. The air thickened, charged. For the first time since their wedding, the space between them wasn't filled with contracts or obligations. It was filled with something far more dangerous. Then Alexander stepped back, shutters slamming down as quickly as they had cracked. "Don't mistake resilience for power," he said, retreating into his armor. "This arrangement still has rules." Elena's jaw tightened. "Rules you made. Rules that don't account for the fact that I'm not going to disappear quietly." For once, he didn't have a sharp reply. His gaze lingered, dark, unreadable, before he turned and left the kitchen, leaving Elena breathless, her pulse racing. The next morning, sunlight spilled through Elena's window. She had barely slept, Alexander's words echoing in her head. This arrangement had rules, but rules had cracks. She wasn't just surviving this marriage anymore. For the first time, she wondered if she might actually win something from it. Not wealth, not status, but the one thing Alexander King swore he didn't have to give: his heart. Later that day, Elena found herself in the garden, pruning roses left neglected by the staff. The simple act steadied her, grounding her in something real. "Careful," Alexander's voice called from the veranda. "Those thorns bite." She glanced up, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Some things are worth bleeding for." He studied her from above, his expression unreadable, but his silence said more than words. For the first time, Alexander King didn't seem untouchable. For the first time, Elena sensed she might just be the thorn in his carefully cultivated life. Chapter 5. The deal gets personal. The clink of crystal glasses and the low hum of conversation filled the private dining room of Le Magnifique, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Elena shifted uncomfortably at the table, her gown hugging her frame in a way that felt both empowering and suffocating. Across from her sat Alexander, impeccably dressed, his dark suit tailored to perfection. Around them, his closest business allies laughed and traded $500,000 deals as though they were gossiping over coffee. Elena had been brought along not as a wife, but as a prop. Or so she assumed, until Alexander's hand covered hers under the table. Her breath caught. He didn't even look at her, his expression carved from stone as he continued speaking about a pending acquisition. But his thumb brushed her knuckles, steady and deliberate, as if silently saying, "You're not just here for show." When dessert arrived, one of the men raised his glass. To Alexander King, the man who doesn't bend, doesn't break, and never lets anyone close enough to try. The table erupted in laughter, but Elena felt Alexander's grip tighten around her hand. A flicker of something, anger, tension, passed across his face. And then, to her shock, Alexander leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. "Smile, Elena." She obeyed, though her heart was hammered. "Because tonight," he continued softly, "I'm going to show them just how wrong they are." An hour later, as their car glided through the city streets, Elena finally spoke. "You used me tonight." Alexander's gaze stayed on the glittering skyline. "I didn't use you. I needed them to see I'm not untouchable." "And I was your shield?" "You were my wife," he corrected sharply. His eyes finally met hers, molten and unreadable. "For once, you were exactly what I needed." His words were a trap. Velvet on the outside, steel on the inside. Elena knew it, but they still wrapped around her heart like a dangerous embrace. Back at the mansion, Alexander dismissed the driver and walked inside without a word. Elena followed, confusion and frustration boiling inside her. In the foyer, she stopped him. "Why me, Alexander? Why tonight? You could have hired anyone, brought anyone, but you chose me. Why?" He turned, his eyes dark and blazing. "Because you don't flinch. You don't bow. And when you stand beside me, Elena, you make me look like the man they all fear I might never be." Her breath hitched. This wasn't the cold, untouchable Alexander she'd married. This was a man admitting, if only for a fleeting second, that he needed her. But before she could respond, he closed the distance between them. His hand brushed her cheek, his touch uncharacteristically gentle. "This arrangement," he murmured, "was supposed to be business. But business doesn't keep me awake at night wondering what you'll say next. Business doesn't make me want to—" He stopped, the sentence hanging dangerously in the air. Elena's heart pounded so loud she could barely hear her own voice. "To what?" Alexander's jaw clenched. He pulled back abruptly, retreating into himself. "To break the very contract I made." And with that, he turned and strode up the stairs, leaving Elena trembling in the foyer, the ghost of his almost confession searing her skin. Later that night, Elena lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. The deal was shifting. The boundaries were cracking. And if she wasn't careful, she wasn't just going to lose her heart. She was going to rewrite the rules of the game entirely. Chapter 6. The first kiss that wasn't supposed to happen. The storm outside rattled the windows, a low growl rolling across the city. Elena sat in the mansion's library, curled into a velvet armchair with a book she wasn't really reading. The words blurred, her mind trapped on the memory of Alexander's hand brushing her cheek, his unfinished sentence hanging in the air like forbidden fruit. Her heart wanted to chase it. Her mind screamed to run. The clock ticked past midnight when the door creaked open. She looked up, and there he was. Alexander. Still in his suit, his tie loosened, his hair slightly mussed. He looked less like the unshakable billionaire king, and more like a man who hadn't slept in days. His eyes found her instantly. "Elena," he said softly. She straightened. "You're awake. So are you." The silence that followed was thick, alive, pressing down on her chest. He moved closer, each step deliberate, until he was standing by the fireplace, his shadow stretching long against the room's golden glow. "I didn't mean to." He paused, raking a hand through his hair. "Tonight, I said too much." "You didn't finish saying it," she whispered before she could stop herself. That made him look at her. Really look at her. His gaze was so intense it felt like he was peeling away every layer she'd built to protect herself. "Elena," he said, her name breaking from him like an oath. "You make me reckless." The air between them snapped. She stood without thinking, the book falling forgotten to the floor. Then why fight it? He was in front of her in 2 strides, his hands gripping her arms. Not rough, not cold, but as if anchoring himself to reality. "Because," he said, his voice low and ragged, "our contract has rules. Rules that keep us from making mistakes we can't take back." "And what if the rules are the mistake?" Elena shot back, her voice trembling with defiance. "What if pretending is the lie, Alexander?" His jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd walk away again, retreat into that fortress of stone. But he didn't. Instead, he lowered his head, and before she could breathe, his lips pressed against hers. The world shattered. The kiss wasn't careful. It was fire meeting gasoline. His hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her closer, while her fingers clutched at his shirt as though she could hold him there forever. It was hunger and denial and everything they'd locked away, finally breaking loose. When they pulled apart, gasping, her forehead rested against his. "This," he murmured, his breath warm against her lips, "wasn't supposed to happen." "But it did," she whispered back. And then he kissed her again, slower this time, deep, deliberate, like he was memorizing her. By the time they finally parted, her knees were weak, her lips swollen, and her heart in freefall. Alexander stepped back, his chest rising and falling, his mask nowhere in sight. For once, he wasn't the cold, calculating billionaire. He was just a man who wanted her. "Elena," he said, almost desperately. "Tell me to stop. Tell me this was nothing. Tell me." She shook her head, cutting him off with trembling words. "I can't." His hand hovered at her cheek, aching to touch her again. "Then God help us both." That night, Elena lay in bed wide awake, her lips still tingling, her heart still burning. Their contract was no longer just words on paper, and she knew with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty, everything had changed. Chapter 7. When Desire Becomes Dangerous. The morning after the kiss was an exercise in torture. Elena stood at the long dining table, trying to butter her toast while her hands shook. Across from her, Alexander sat in his impeccable suit, sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. His face was unreadable, his mask firmly back in place. But she could still feel the ghost of his lips on hers. "Busy day?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "Always." His answer was clipped. He didn't look at her. A silence stretched. Then, finally, his eyes lifted, and for one charged second, their gazes locked. Heat flared in her chest, curling low in her stomach. She looked away first, heart racing. He stood abruptly. "I have a meeting. Don't wait up." And just like that, he was gone. Elena pressed her hands to the table, trying to steady herself. But no matter how hard she tried, the truth whispered louder than reason. One kiss had undone her entire world. By evening, the tension snapped again. The storm outside had returned, rain lashing against the mansion's windows. Elena had curled up in the library once more, her supposed safe place, a book open in her lap. She heard him before she saw him, the low thud of his footsteps. Then Alexander appeared, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his jaw tight as though the entire day had been a war. "You're avoiding me," she accused softly. He froze. "And you're waiting for me." Her breath hitched. "Maybe I am." That broke something in him. In 2 strides, he was in front of her, pulling her up from the chair. His hands framed her face, and then his mouth was on hers again, hard, demanding, as though he was starving, and she was the only thing that could satisfy him. She gasped, her arms flying around his neck, surrendering as his lips traced fire down her jaw, her throat. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice shaking. He pulled back, his chest heaving. His eyes blazed with desire and something darker, fear. "This is dangerous," he said hoarsely. "If we keep going, there will be no turning back." "Then don't stop," she whispered, trembling. "Don't you dare stop." His restraint shattered. He kissed her again, deeper, his hands roaming down her back, pulling her flush against him. Every touch was electricity, every sigh a confession neither dared to voice. But then, just as quickly as it began, he tore himself away, his fists clenching at his sides. "No," he ground out. "I can't do this to you." Elena's lips parted, her heart shattering. "Do what?" "Give you only pieces of me. That kiss, this desire. It isn't fair to you." His voice was raw, almost broken. "I don't know how to love halfway, Elena, and I don't know if I can give you the whole of me." Tears burned her eyes. "And yet, you already have more of me than I ever meant to give." For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing heavily, the storm raging outside as fiercely as the storm inside them. Finally, Alexander stepped back, his face hardening though his eyes betrayed him. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "The contract, our lives, they'll unravel." Elena swallowed the ache in her throat. But what if unraveling is the only way to find the truth? He stared at her, torn between the empire he'd built and the woman who was breaking down his walls one stolen kiss at a time. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving her trembling in the silence. Elena sank back into the chair, pressing her fingers to her lips, her heart screaming against the chains of reason. This wasn't pretend anymore. This was dangerous, beautiful, irrevocable. And she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was already in too deep to ever climb out. Chapter 8. The Night. They almost crossed the line. The rain hadn't stopped. By the 3rd day of storms, the mansion seemed more like a gilded prison than a home. Elena wandered the echoing halls, restless, her thoughts looping back to the same forbidden kiss, the same almost confession in Alexander's eyes. That evening, the power flickered and went out. Shadows swallowed the grand rooms, leaving only candlelight to chase away the dark. Elena was in the kitchen, trying to find a lighter for a candle, when the door opened and Alexander stepped in, his presence filling the room like a lightning strike. "You shouldn't be moving around in the dark," he said, his voice low. She arched a brow. "I'm not made of glass, you know." He moved closer, taking the lighter from her trembling hands. His fingers brushed hers, and the contact was enough to send heat coursing through her body. The candle flared to life, casting his face in a golden glow. He looked unguarded, tired, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. "Sit," he said softly, gesturing to the counter stool. She obeyed, her pulse erratic as he opened the fridge and pulled out 2 glasses of wine. It was so startlingly ordinary that she almost laughed. This billionaire, this man carved from steel and shadows, pouring her a drink by candlelight. He set 1 glass in front of her. "To survival," he said, lifting his own. She clinked hers against his. "And to storms that trap us." His lips quirked. Then they drank. For a moment, it was easy, almost normal. But the air between them thickened again, every glance charged, every silence speaking louder than words. Her eyes drifted to his mouth before she could stop herself. He noticed. "Elena," he said warningly. "What?" Her voice came out husky, betraying her. "You know what?" The next second, he was in front of her, his hand braced on the counter beside her, caging her in. The storm howled outside, but all she could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his breath fanning her cheek. "I can't," she confessed, trembling. His mouth claimed hers, hot and desperate. She gasped, clutching his shirt as his tongue teased hers, as his hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, turning hungry, reckless. Elena's head spun. She felt his strength around her, the heat of his body pressing into hers, the world narrowing down to just this fire, this impossible need. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the counter, but neither of them cared. He lifted her onto the counter with a swift motion, standing between her knees. Her fingers tangled in his hair as his lips trailed fire along her neck. "Alexander," she breathed, her voice breaking with desire and fear. He groaned, pulling back just enough to search her eyes. His pupils were blown wide, his chest rising hard against hers. "If I don't stop now," his words were rough, ragged. "There won't be any stopping after this." Elena cupped his face with trembling hands. "Then don't stop." For 1 tortured second, he looked ready to give in. His lips brushed hers again, softer this time, almost reverent. Then his body went rigid. "No." He stepped back abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "Not like this. You deserve more than a man who can't give you forever." Her heart cracked. "And what if forever is already what I want with you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and unpolished. His eyes darkened, but instead of answering, he turned away, his fists clenched. "Elena, you'll ruin me." The storm outside roared louder, as though echoing the chaos inside them. She slid off the counter, tears stinging her eyes but her chin lifting with quiet resolve. "Maybe you need to be ruined." Then she left the kitchen, her pulse still racing, her body still on fire from his touch, her heart bleeding from his restraint. In the empty silence, Alexander braced his hands on the counter, his chest heaving. One more kiss, and he would have surrendered everything, his control, his empire, his carefully constructed life. And yet, even now, all he could think about was her. Chapter 9. The Jealous Spark. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean, the sky a pale blue canvas. But Elena felt anything but calm. She replayed the night in the kitchen over and over, her lips still remembering the heat of his kiss, her heart still aching from his retreat. By morning, Alexander had slipped back into his armor, immaculate suit, composed tone, unreadable eyes. It was as though the candlelit storm had never happened. Elena hated how much it hurt. That afternoon, the mansion's grand sitting room filled with unexpected company. Alexander had agreed to host a luncheon for one of his business associates, and Elena found herself trapped in the glittering scene of champagne glasses and carefully polite laughter. She was standing near the piano when she saw her, Isabella Laurent, a French heiress with flawless skin, sharp eyes, and a history with Alexander written all over the way she touched his arm. Isabella leaned in close, laughing at something he whispered, her red lips dangerously near his ear. Something ugly flared inside Elena. Her chest tightened, her fingers clenched around her glass. She wasn't supposed to care. This was a contract marriage. She wasn't supposed to feel like her world was collapsing just because another woman smiled at him. But she did. Isabella's eyes flicked to Elena then, sharp and calculating, as if sensing her unease. She smiled sweetly and said, loud enough for Elena to hear, "Alexander, darling, you never told me you'd married, and to someone so unexpected." The room fell into a hush, curious eyes darting between them. Elena forced a smile, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Contracts sometimes yield the most surprising results. Isabella arched a brow, clearly amused. She turned back to Alexander, laying a hand on his chest. "Well, you've always had a taste for unique arrangements." That did it. Elena's face burned, not from embarrassment, but from fury. She wanted to rip Isabella's hand away, to shout that Alexander was hers, contract or not. But before she could move, Alexander's voice cut through the room. Low. Dangerous. "Enough, Isabella." The edge in his tone silenced even the background murmurs. Isabella blinked, surprised. "I was only teasing." "You were being disrespectful to my wife," he said, his jaw tight. Wife. The word hit Elena like a thunderclap. He had said it with such certainty, such authority, that her knees nearly buckled. Isabella's smile faltered. For the first time, she looked unsettled. "Of course," she murmured, withdrawing her hand. Alexander didn't glance at her again. Instead, he crossed the room and stood beside Elena, his hand brushing the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Shall we?" he asked her softly, ignoring the watchful eyes around them. Elena swallowed hard and nodded, letting him guide her out of the room. They didn't speak until they were alone in his office, the door clicking shut behind them. "You didn't have to do that," she said, though her heart still raced from the way he had claimed her in front of everyone. He turned to her, eyes dark. "Yes, I did." "Alexander." She tried to breathe, to make sense of the feelings churning inside her. "Why does it matter so much to you what she said?" His gaze locked with hers, intense and unyielding. "Because you are mine, Elena." The words tore the air between them. Her pulse skittered. She whispered, "Yours?" "Yes." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hands bracing her waist, pulling her close. "And it infuriates me that I can't show it the way I want to, that I'm holding back when every part of me wants to keep you far away from men like me. And yet—" He broke off, his forehead pressing against hers, his breath harsh. "I can't stand the thought of you being hurt, or touched, or even looked at by someone else." Elena's throat tightened. Her hands trembled as they lifted to his chest. "Alexander, that's not just the contract talking." He shut his eyes, jaw tense. "No, it's not." For a moment, the world held its breath. The space between them hummed with something raw, unspoken, undeniable. But then, as if catching himself, Alexander pulled back slightly. He cursed under his breath and turned away, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't what we agreed to." Elena's voice cracked. Maybe what we agreed to doesn't matter anymore. Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Careful, Elena. You don't know what you're asking for." Her eyes glistened, but she lifted her chin. "Then show me." The words hung between them like fire, daring him, daring herself. He didn't move, didn't answer, only stood there, a storm in human form, while her heart thudded painfully in her chest. And for the first time, Elena knew. His restraint wasn't indifference. It was fear, fear of just how much he already wanted her. Chapter 10. The breaking point. The office was heavy with silence. The storm outside had ended, but another raged in the space between them. Elena stood frozen, her words still hanging in the air. "Then show me." Alexander's back was to her, shoulders tense, every line of his body taut with restraint. He didn't move, didn't answer. The quiet stretched, thick and unbearable. Finally, Elena's resolve snapped. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "You kissed me, Alexander. You didn't imagine that. You wanted it just as much as I did." He turned sharply, his eyes burning with something dangerous. "Don't," he growled. Her heart pounded, but she didn't retreat. "Don't what? Don't speak the truth? Don't remind you that you're not made of stone?" "Elena!" His voice was a warning, deep and edged with desperation, but she refused to back down. She crossed the final step that separated them, her small hands pressing flat against his chest. She felt his heart hammering beneath her palms, wild and unsteady. "You keep saying this is just a contract, that you're protecting me. But what if I don't want protection? What if I want you?" His breath hissed through clenched teeth. His hands caught her wrists, holding them as if he meant to push her away. But he didn't. His grip trembled, betraying the war raging inside him. "You don't know what you're asking for," he whispered, voice raw. She lifted her chin, her eyes shimmering with defiance and something softer, deeper. "Then tell me. Tell me why you're so afraid to feel this, to feel me." Something broke then. A sound escaped him, half growl, half groan, as he released her wrists only to cup her face in his hands. His eyes burned into hers, his forehead pressed to hers like he was drowning, and she was the only thing keeping him afloat. "Elena!" Her name was a plea, a curse, a confession all at once. And then the dam shattered. His mouth crashed onto hers, fierce and desperate, nothing like the hesitant kiss in the kitchen. This was fire, unchecked, unrestrained, consuming them both. Elena gasped against his lips, her fingers fisting in his shirt as he kissed her like a starving man finally given food. His hands slid down her neck, her shoulders, pulling her flush against him. It was everything she had dreamed and more, raw, aching, unstoppable. But then, as suddenly as it began, he tore himself away. He staggered back, chest heaving, his eyes wide with torment. "Damn it!" he shouted, raking both hands through his hair. "This is exactly why I can't—" He stopped, shaking his head. Tears burned Elena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her voice wavered but carried steel. "You can't what? Admit that you feel something for me? That this isn't just a contract anymore?" His jaw clenched, his eyes fierce. "Yes, I feel something. Too much. More than I should. And that's the problem." Her heart twisted painfully. "Why is it a problem to want me?" "Because," he snapped. Then his voice broke, softer. "Because everything I touch, I ruin. I've built my empire on cold decisions, on destroying rivals, on sacrificing anything that stood in my way. You don't deserve to be dragged into the darkness that follows me." Her breath caught. For the first time she saw it, the cracks in his armor. Not indifference, not cruelty. Fear of himself. Slowly she stepped closer again, though his hands hung at his sides, fists clenched as if holding himself back. She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw. "You don't ruin everything you touch, Alexander. Look at me. You saved me from a future I didn't choose. You've protected me even when you didn't have to. You kissed me like I was worth something." His eyes shut tight, as if her words were knives cutting through him. Her voice softened. "I don't want perfection. I don't want safety. I just want you." His eyes snapped open, blazing with a war he could no longer win. And then he grabbed her again. But this time it wasn't just fire. It was surrender. He kissed her deeply, desperately, as if he had finally accepted the truth he'd been running from. She melted against him, her arms circling his neck, her soul knowing this moment would change everything. When they broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "God help me, Elena," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I don't think I can let you go anymore." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, even through the tears on her cheeks. Then don't. Chapter 11. The first real night together. The air between them crackled, charged with everything unspoken, everything denied for too long. Elena's heart raced as Alexander held her, his forehead pressed to hers, his breaths uneven. He had confessed it, the one truth she had longed to hear, that he couldn't let her go. But the way his hands trembled against her waist told her this was still a battle for him. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Stop fighting this. Stop fighting us." He closed his eyes, his jaw tight as if clinging to the last thread of restraint. "I don't want to hurt you." "You won't." She lifted her hand, cupping his cheek. Her thumb brushed over the faint stubble, the warmth of his skin grounding her. "The only thing that would hurt me is if you kept pretending you don't feel this too." Something inside him broke then. His eyes opened, and there was no more hesitation, no more denial, only raw hunger. With a low groan, he pulled her fully against him, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger that stole her breath. This kiss wasn't desperate like before. It was sure, deep, consuming. A kiss that spoke of ownership, of surrender, of need that could no longer be chained. Elena melted into him, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer still. She felt his strength, his warmth, the steady thrum of his heart under her palms. For the first time since their marriage began, she didn't feel like a stranger in his world. She felt like she belonged. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her toward the bedroom with long, determined strides. His lips never left hers, not until he set her gently on the bed. Alexander pulled back, his eyes locked on her face, dark and blazing, but softer than she had ever seen them. His voice was rough, breaking. "Tell me to stop, Elena, and I swear I will." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but her gaze never wavered. "Don't stop." That was all it took. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring her, as if each second was precious. His hands trailed down her arms, leaving fire in their wake. She shivered, not from cold, but from the heat pooling inside her, from the way he touched her like she was fragile, and yet the most powerful force in his life. Every moment carried weight. Every brush of his lips across her skin was a confession, every sigh against her neck a vow. She clung to him, gasping his name, her heart swelling with something she could no longer deny. He pulled back only once more, his forehead pressed against hers, his voice ragged. "I don't deserve you, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you." Her throat tightened with tears, but her smile trembled through them. "Then start tonight." The intensity in his eyes nearly undid her. And then, with one final kiss, the rest of the world faded away. When Elena awoke the next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting golden warmth across the sheets. For the first time, she wasn't alone in the vast expanse of their marital bed. Alexander lay beside her, one arm draped protectively over her waist, his breathing even and calm. Her chest ached, but this time it wasn't with longing. It was with hope. Because last night hadn't been a mistake. It had been a beginning. She smiled faintly, closing her eyes again, letting herself believe, if only for this fragile moment, that maybe, just maybe, their marriage was no longer a contract. Maybe it was becoming something real. Chapter 12. The morning after and the first real promise. Elena stirred at the soft brush of fingers against her cheek. Her lashes fluttered open to find Alexander watching her, his dark eyes no longer guarded, but strangely tender. Sunlight poured into the room, gilding him in a glow that almost made her forget the man she had married had once been untouchable, cold, and closed off. "Good morning," he said, voice low and rough from sleep. "Good morning," she whispered, suddenly shy. Her cheeks heated as the memories of last night tumbled back in vivid flashes, their kisses, the way he had held her, the way he had whispered things he had never dared say before. A small smile tugged at his lips. "You're blushing." "You're not supposed to point it out," she muttered, burying her face against the pillow. He chuckled softly, a sound so rare it sent warmth flooding through her chest. Carefully, as though afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast, Alexander tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Elena." His tone shifted, deepened. "About last night." Her heart stilled. Was he about to take it back? Say it was a mistake? She braced herself, but instead his hand slipped into hers beneath the sheets, his grip warm and steady. "I don't regret a single moment." Relief washed over her so fiercely it nearly made her cry. She blinked fast, trying to steady her voice. "Neither do I." Something softened in his features then, the kind of softness she had only glimpsed in fleeting moments. His thumb brushed over her knuckles as he exhaled. "I've been a coward," he admitted. "I told myself this marriage would always stay a contract, that I couldn't let myself feel. But last night, you broke through everything I was trying to hold back." Elena's breath caught. She had waited so long to hear words like these, but hearing them now, spoken in his rough honesty, felt almost surreal. "I don't want to keep pretending anymore," he continued. "You deserve more than distance. You deserve more than the cold man I've been to you." Her throat tightened, her eyes shining. "And what are you saying, Alexander?" He shifted closer, their foreheads touching. "I'm saying I want to try. For real. No more half measures. I want this marriage to be more than a contract. I want us." Her chest ached so sweetly she thought it might burst. She searched his eyes, looking for hesitation, for doubt, but all she found was truth. "Do you promise?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. "I promise," he said without hesitation, his grip on her hand tightening. "I'll make mistakes, I know I will, but I'll never run from what I feel for you again." Her tears finally spilled over, but this time they weren't from loneliness or longing. They were from joy. She leaned up, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was soft, reverent, a kiss of beginnings. When they pulled back, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "You should know something, though." Her brows lifted. "What's that?" His mouth curved in the faintest smile. "I'm not good at mornings, so if you're expecting breakfast in bed every day, I'll need practice." She laughed through her tears, swatting lightly at his chest. "We'll work on it together." For a long time, they simply lay there, holding each other as the sunlight streamed in, the weight of their promises hanging in the quiet morning air. And for the first time since they had said, "I do," Elena felt it deep in her bones. She wasn't just Alexander's wife by contract. She was his wife by choice. And he was finally choosing her. Chapter 13, The Outside World Intrudes. For 2 blissful days, Elena and Alexander lived in a fragile bubble. They shared quiet breakfasts, walked through the estate gardens hand in hand, and, for the first time, allowed themselves to simply be. But bubbles don't last. On the 3rd morning, Elena awoke to the sound of Alexander's phone vibrating relentlessly on the nightstand. He had already risen, his side of the bed cold. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and caught the tail end of his sharp tone drifting in from the study down the hall. "No, that's impossible. Who told you that? I don't care what the press is saying. You will shut down that headline immediately." Her heart lurched. She slipped from the bed, padding softly toward the door. "Alexander?" she called gently. He turned, his face dark, jaw tight. His phone was still pressed to his ear, but the moment his eyes met hers, a flash of worry crossed his features. "I'll call you back," he muttered into the receiver, then set the phone down with a click. Elena frowned. "What happened?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he rubbed the back of his neck. "Someone leaked a story to the tabloids. They're claiming our marriage isn't real." Her breath caught. "What?" "They're calling you a gold digger. saying I paid you to play the doting wife while I handle my empire. His eyes darkened further. Some of the articles even claim you're still in love with another man and that this marriage is nothing more than a convenient front. Her knees wobbled. She gripped the doorframe for support. That's not true. I know, Alexander said firmly, closing the space between them. His hands settled on her shoulders, steadying her. But in this world, truth doesn't matter as much as perception. Her stomach twisted. For a fleeting moment, their marriage had felt real, whole. But now, outsiders were clawing their way in, threatening to rip apart what they had just begun to build. Who would do this? She whispered. Rivals, enemies, people who would love to see me distracted or vulnerable. His expression hardened. And they think targeting you is the way to do it. Her chest ached. She hated being seen as a weakness, hated that she might drag him down. But Alexander's grip tightened on her shoulders as if reading her thoughts. Listen to me. You are not my weakness, Elena. You are the one thing keeping me sane in all of this. Her eyes stung. She wanted to believe him, needed to. But doubt crept in, cruel and insistent. What if people don't stop believing it? His gaze sharpened. Then I'll make them stop. They'll see the truth with their own eyes. Before she could ask what he meant, the doorbell rang, echoing through the estate. Elena startled. Alexander glanced toward the sound, his jaw clenching. Stay here, he ordered softly, then strode from the study. But Elena couldn't stay put. Curiosity and fear pulled her after him. When she reached the grand foyer, her stomach sank. A swarm of reporters stood at the gates, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as they shouted questions through the iron bars. Some even waved printed copies of the scandalous headlines. Alexander, did you really marry her as a business arrangement? Elena, are you his mistress turned wife? Is it true you've been paid to stay by his side? Elena froze on the stairs, her face burning, throat tightening. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that this marriage was no act, but the words tangled in her chest. Alexander didn't flinch. He strode to the door, stood tall, and called out, his voice cold and commanding. My wife and I owe you nothing, but if you want proof of our marriage's legitimacy... He turned then, his eyes locking with Elena's across the foyer. You'll have it. Before she could move, he extended his hand toward her. Elena. Her breath hitched. Slowly, trembling, she descended the stairs and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, pulling her close until she stood against him. And then, before the flashing cameras, before the swarm of greedy eyes, Alexander cupped her face and kissed her. Not the kind of kiss meant to appease the press. Not staged. Not cold. It was real. Fierce. A promise made flesh. Elena gasped softly against his lips, her heart soaring even as the crowd roared with frenzied shouts. She clutched his shirt, clinging to the moment, to the truth he was bearing to the world. When he finally drew back, his voice was steel. This marriage is real, and anyone who questions it again will answer me. The gates buzzed with chaos, but all Elena could hear was the thunder of her heart. For the first time, their private world and the outside one collided, and though fear still lurked in her chest, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Alexander was no longer hiding. Chapter 14. The breaking point. The kiss silenced doubts, but only for a heartbeat. By evening, the tabloids had twisted the moment into something else entirely. Elena sat at the kitchen counter with her tablet, scrolling through headline after headline. Billionaire's publicity stunt kiss. Desperate attempt to salvage fake marriage? Who is Elena Greyson really? Her chest tightened, the words blurred, cruel and relentless. She wanted to throw the tablet across the room. The front door clicked shut. Alexander walked in, his tie loosened, his hair mussed in a way that told her he'd had a hellish day. Their eyes met, and for a moment, she saw the strain in him. Tight jaw, shadowed eyes. "You saw it?" he asked quietly. She swallowed hard. "They'll never believe us, Alexander." His expression hardened. "They will. I'll make sure of it." But she could see the weight pressing down on him. Not just the gossip, but something deeper. "What happened?" she whispered. He hesitated, then set his briefcase on the counter. "The board called an emergency meeting. Some of them think the scandal is making me unfit to lead. There's talk of pushing me out." Her heart lurched. "What? But this is your company, your family's legacy." "Yes." His voice was sharp, clipped. "And they'd see it stolen from me because of a few cheap headlines." She reached for his hand. "Then fight them. Show them who you are." He looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "That's the thing, Elena. I thought I knew who I was. But now?" He trailed off, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter. I won't let them win." But as the night wore on, the cracks widened. Later, when she brought him coffee in his study, she overheard voices on speakerphone, raised, accusing. "You've compromised us, Alexander. This marriage is reckless. Investors are panicking." "I said I'll handle it." "You'd better, or we'll vote to strip you of control." The line went dead. Silence filled the room. Alexander sat rigid at his desk, his knuckles white around his glass of whiskey. Elena stepped closer, her heart twisting. "You don't have to face this alone," she murmured. He looked up, his gaze burning, almost desperate. "Don't you see, Elena, you are the reason they're turning on me." The words landed like a slap. Her breath hitched, her throat tight. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Do you really believe that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. His jaw clenched. Regret flickered in his eyes, but he didn't take the words back. Elena's vision blurred. She turned, stumbling toward the door. "Elena, wait," he said hoarsely, rising to his feet. But she shook her head. "No. You made it clear. I'm nothing but a liability to you." Her chest ached as she fled down the hall, her hands trembling, her heart splintering. In the sanctuary of her room, she sank to the floor, her back against the bed. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. She had tried so hard to be strong, to stand beside him through the storm. But if Alexander himself thought she was his downfall, how could she stay? In the shadows of the study, Alexander pressed his palms against the desk, his chest heaving. The words he'd thrown at her echoed like poison in his head. "You are the reason they're turning on me." He hadn't meant it. God, he hadn't. The moment he saw the pain in her eyes, he'd wanted to tear the words from the air and swallow them whole. But it was too late. For the first time, Alexander Greyson, the man who had always commanded every boardroom, every deal, every storm, felt powerless. And it terrified him, because losing the company would be nothing compared to losing her. Chapter 15. The Separation. Elena stood by the window, her suitcase at her feet. Dawn painted the skyline in pale pinks and golds, but her heart felt heavy, gray. She had packed only what she needed: clothes, books, the little sketchbook she never let go of. She didn't want to take anything else. Not when every corner of this penthouse whispered Alexander's name. A knock sounded on the door. She froze. "Elena." Alexander's voice came, low and rough, the sound of a man who hadn't slept. "Open the door." Her hand hovered on the handle. She shouldn't. If she let him in, her resolve would break. But when his voice cracked, "Please," she couldn't stop herself. The door swung open. He looked wrecked, his shirt rumpled, his eyes shadowed with regret. A man who carried the world's weight and still somehow feared losing one woman more than anything else. "You're leaving," he said softly, his gaze dropping to the suitcase. She swallowed hard. "I can't stay where I'm not wanted." His eyes darkened. "You think I don't want you? Elena, you're the only thing I want." Her chest tightened. "Then why did you say—" "Because I'm a fool." he cut in, stepping closer, his voice raw. Because I let fear and pride speak when I should have told you the truth. Her breath trembled. And what's the truth? He stopped inches from her, his voice breaking. That I love you. That I can lose the company, the money, the name. But if I lose you, I lose everything. Her throat closed. The words she'd longed to hear were finally here, spilling from him like confession, like surrender. But she shook her head. Love isn't enough if you don't trust me. If you don't see me as your partner, Alexander, then we have nothing. He closed his eyes as though the words gutted him. When he opened them, they burned with fierce determination. Then let me prove it. Before she could respond, he dropped to his knees. The billionaire who had commanded boardrooms, who had made the world bend to his will, was kneeling before her like a man stripped bare. Elena Greyson, he said hoarsely. Not my contract wife, not my shield against the world. My wife, my heart, my only. Forgive me. Stay with me. Let me be the man you deserve. Her breath caught, tears spilling down her cheeks. She sank down to him, her hands trembling as she cupped his face. Don't make promises you can't keep, she whispered. I'll keep this one, he vowed, pressing her hand to his heart. For the rest of my life. Her suitcase lay forgotten as he kissed her, slow and reverent, as though sealing an oath. And this time, there was no doubt, no mask, no contract. Only love. Epilogue. 1 year later. The Greyson Gala sparkled brighter than ever. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers, laughter, and the hum of music. But all eyes weren't on the new business ventures or the wealth on display. They were on the couple at the center of it all. Elena Greyson, radiant in a deep sapphire gown, her hand resting on the arm of her husband. Alexander Greyson, the man once labeled cold and untouchable, now smiling, truly smiling, as he leaned toward the woman at his side. Mrs. Greyson, a guest gushed, you've changed him. He's human now. Elena laughed softly, her eyes sparkling as she glanced at Alexander. He was always human. He just needed someone to remind him. Later, when the crowd thinned, Alexander guided her to the balcony, away from curious eyes. The city stretched out before them, glittering like a promise. You know, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. A year ago, I thought I was going to lose everything. She tilted her head toward him. And now? He smiled, the kind of smile he shared with no one else. Now I know I have everything that matters. She rested her hand on her stomach, where a quiet secret bloomed. His gaze followed, softening with wonder. Elena. His voice caught, unsteady. She pressed a finger to his lips. Not yet. Tonight is about us. He drew her close, his hand covering hers protectively. Every night will be about us, he whispered. And under the stars, the billionaire who once believed love was weakness finally understood the truth. Love was his greatest strength.
Thank you for staying till the end. If you enjoy the video, please hit the like button, share, and comment. We'll love to hear from you.